He said, Dave, this will be the first Christmas lunch where I'm sitting down with the family and I won't be thinking about how I'm going to pay the fertiliser bill in January. And I just stopped, he stopped, and it was just a really, like a really light bulb moment.
The Biological Farming RoundTable podcast helps farmers explore innovative, low-input, regenerative and profitable farming systems. The Biological Farming RoundTable is sponsored by Nutrisoil, an award-winning biological liquid fertiliser made from a big worm farm. Nutrisoil's purpose is to empower farmers to produce life-enriching food. My name is Nakala Maddock. I work at Nutrisoil. I envisage a future where farmers are rewarded for producing nutrient-rich foods and consumers have this easily available to them. Hello everyone, Nakala Maddock here from Nutrisoil. Today I have David Hardwick with me from Soil Land Food.
G'day, Nakala.
Hey, and I've also got Luke Harrington from Farming with me.
Hi, Nakala and Dave.
Yeah, great. So today we're going to be talking about managing the transition into regenerative agriculture, where you come from, where you're going. Managing the change into regenerative agriculture can be risky and it can be challenging. So we're going to explore how you can put in place things to help you manage that transition. So Dave, I'll hand it over to you about transition and change and why it's such a big topic, an important part of the whole transition. Transition's important for transition.
Yeah, I mean, it sort of underlines everything people do when they're changing the farm business. And like we were just having a chat before the podcast, and Luke was saying that, he's being taught to ride a horse. He can already ride a horse, but he's being taught a different way by the riding teacher. But like, he's never ridden that way that she's hoping he rides. But it's like, well, how do I know how to ride that way? I've never done it.
He doesn't know what it feels like.
He's in a learning process. But whether he wants to ride that different way is also the first thing, and that's all about motivation. Why would you want to learn a different way? Why are you trying to learn a different way to ride a horse, though? You already know how to ride a horse.
Well, I know how to chase kangaroos and ride through the bush, but I do not know how to ride in the show arena, which is where my wife wants to go and do some showing. So
it's a great example of why people want to change some motivations.
Yeah.
And the fact that a lot of, if you're a conventional farmer, you already know how to farm. You've been doing it probably multi-generations, a lot of people. But so why do you want to change to regen ag? That's the first thing. Obviously, it's a motivation. Why do people change? So, I mean, there's probably lots of reasons. And like one is men and women in the family might have different reasons too. And that's another thing people talk about. So why the husband might want to change might be different than why the missus might want to change. And someone else might want to change, or the kids might want to change. So what are the motivators that make people or drive people to change? So when I was going through uni many years ago, we were taught how to go out and visit farmers and kind of identify the change process that they were going through. And I'll never forget going to an orchardist in the central western New South Wales who grew nashi pears. And all of us students rocked up on a minibus and we got out, and he had a beautiful lawn, this farmer, near his orchard and outside his house, and he's talking to us about how he's biologically growing nashis. And then we asked him, why did you change? He said, well, one day I was spraying the orchard with a herbicide, or I think it was a herbicide, and he walked back up to the house with this beautiful lawn, and he said, I woke up a few hours later and passed out on the lawn. And I woke up, I didn't know where I was after spraying the crop. And he woke up and realised, I can't keep doing this. And that was what's called a trigger event, that triggered him to go, I've got to do things differently. So
that's very much how Nutrisoil was born.
Yeah, absolutely. Graham had a chemical accident at a pesticide, I think, or an insecticide spilled out from a tractor pipe that broke. So he had to farm another way. And, there's lots of people out there that say, working with chemicals, I get a headache, I just can't do it anymore.
That's often a reason people start to think about, we're doing things. But there's other reasons, like some people, they just don't feel like, I know a lot of people interested in nutrient-dense food, and a lot of farmers want to grow nutrient-dense food, not just sort of stuff that's not healthy for other people to eat. that's a value they have. So sometimes, what you're doing doesn't meet the values that you have inside. So you might feel conflicted or whatever. And that triggers you to change. I mean, it doesn't always happen straight away overnight with one kind of road to Damascus event. Sometimes it builds up. And then someone in the family is talking about something that's important to them. And then over time, that gets in your brain or, different ways. Don't make money. It's not financial anymore.
Yep.
Can't have a holiday anymore because it's too busy or whatever. It's a combination. But I guess it's important to be really clear as to why you want to change to regen ag if you've got a farm business, because it is a big change. And being clear of why helps motivate you or keep you sure that, we want to do it. Yeah.
I can't imagine that clear decision is going to come straight away. It might come straight away because, you're the person that you knew passed out.
Yeah.
And that was really a health risk. But someone might just get invited along to a regen ag course and just have a go, oh, there is something different out there.
Yeah. And it might be just positive, like a lot of regen ag communities and networks are quite positively focused, like we're doing things when we're just worried about the negatives. So you enjoy being in that community. So there's that the peer group is positive, and that's important. Positive for me is tough at home or the farm business, but this is a positive feeling, and I'm enjoying the positive companionship and network, and that can drive you. So
yeah. Luke, you're out there, you're walking the farms. What's happening? Why are people driven to change?
I think it's actually changed a bit over the journey. So when it first started, when I first started out, it was all about financial pressure. But now that the regenerative world's got a bit more steam up, and it's sort of starting to get in at a government level and all those sorts of things as well, more people are starting to talk about it. So other people are changing for some of the reasons Dave's saying, like nutrient-dense food, and other people are wanting to do it for climate change reasons. Other people are wanting to do it for being in a positive environment. I find that positive thing comes later on. Like, I've found that most people that when I've started, people, if it's a financial decision, they're looking for ways to limit their spending. And as they do that, they get excited about what they see, and they go, wow, look at this grow, or wow, look at that happen. And that's when they get really energized. And then you could really make some change, because all of a sudden in themselves, they want to change.
And there's a positive, there's a lot of positivity, and the perspective they're starting to see that can take.
Yeah, one of the things I always say to guys when we start a program is we want to promote life instead of trying to prevent death, and that sort of rings in people's ears, and they go, yeah, that's a really good way to look at it.
And I guess that comes to this idea that what you're trying to change is that what changes is your perspective on how you do an ag, which is a perspective change. It's not necessarily your values. Your values, it's like when everyone in Australia had to start wearing a seatbelt. Like 50 years ago, we were all told you got to start wearing seatbelts. It didn't mean you changed who you voted for. Like, everyone changed, whether you voted for the National Party or the Labor Party or the Greens or One Nation, whoever. Everyone just changed the seatbelt. So, change doesn't mean you have to change who you are or some core values, although sometimes it does. Sometimes you do change core values, but most people want to do the right thing in life. And, if they see Regen Ag as, as a positive community that is doing the right thing or trying to do the right thing, then they're going, well, wouldn't mind being a part of that. So
we were just having this conversation earlier today, because we found, using that word values, Luke and I were having this conversation, values are so deeply ingrained. Sometimes they're not actually changing their values. They're just learning new things, which then align with their values.
Correct. Yeah. And people are often changed at a deep level, and they might not even be fully aware of it or explicit. They might be aware of it intuitively, because what they're doing doesn't align to their values, even if they're not haven't clearly articulated that, but they just don't feel comfortable anymore. This is just not right. It's not a right fit for me.
Yeah.
I want to do things differently because what I'm doing, I don't feel comfortable with.
Makes life a drag.
Yeah.
You just don't want to keep going out and doing that every day. It doesn't make getting out of bed that great.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. So I guess, it is why change is important, because it's easy to sort of say what I don't want. I don't want all these problems that I currently got. It's easy to kind of look at them, but it's also really important to look at what I do want, and that starts with why I'm doing it, what my motivators are.
Yeah. So I always work on the what, why, and how. So what is my problem and goal? Why do I have that problem or goal? And then I can work out the how I'm going to change that.
Yeah.
So, and back to the values thing, I think it's very important with the language that we use, especially with farmers. We can't go, oh, well, your values aren't as good as mine. I actually think that's a bit degrading to people.
Yeah, patronising,
and no one's going to change if you go in with that attitude. So, like every farmer I know and every farmer I deal with, they want to do the best they can for their land. They want to do the best they can, but they, as you said, that they just don't know what they don't know. Yeah. So if we can just help them a little bit in that change is amazing.
Yeah, and I think that's it. Like changing your farming system, we're all trying to just find a way forward for the community, for Australian ag, and but it's a positive change. So having the motivation is critical. Yeah, and being clear why you're motivated. Am I doing it because someone else wants me to do it? So it brings us to the types of change. So having worked, with the sugarcane farmers that are now legislated and regulated in what they can do on the farm, which is what we call a forced change, where they've had a big change imposed on, like they've got legislation, and you might get something imposed on you by someone else in the family, or your employer or something. You don't want to change, but you're sort of forced to, and that kind of change, people often really react to it when you're forced into something. But most people changing to regen ag, they're doing it because they want to, so it's non-forced, and that's good in a way because you're motivating yourself. But some people kind of get forced in a corner, maybe by economics or the bank or whatever, or climate or the drought. But if you're changing for your own reasons, it's usually much better in terms of your motivation. You'll be more open to going through the change process.
You better understand why it changed.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. Otherwise, there's a lot of confusion.
And you can get angry and all these things, which is fair enough. If you're telling me you should do this, Dave, and you should change it that way, but I'm happy as I am, so leave me alone. Yes, fair enough.
Yeah, absolutely. So we're talking about types of change. You've got an enforced change, but then what other types of change are there when you're changing into regen ag?
Yeah, well, I guess I find it really handy to think about what type of change I'm either going through myself or someone that I'm trying to help's going through. So we've got, is the change imposed on you or it's your own, that we just talked about. But is it a big change? And I'm just using basic words because it's easy to make it all complex. But is it a really big change I'm going through, or is it quite simple changes? So, for example, I'm just swapping out product A for product B, or I'm going to swap from this colour tractor to this colour tractor. Relatively simple change. But when I start going, I'm going to change the whole way I do my cropping on this paddock from monocultures with tillage to no-till, multi-species tactics, and bringing animals back in the system, or, like intercropping and a 10-year sequence. That's a much bigger change. And the reality is when you change your farm business from conventional to regen, it's a complex change. So we're dealing with complex change. It's quite, marketing people are great at getting us drinking soft drink A, swapping to soft drink B, but that's really simple change. But we're talking about complex stuff, and that's much harder for someone just to go, I'm going to change from conventional to regen ag. It's not just changing from one type of drink to another. There's a lot more to it.
So there's so many variables, isn't there?
Yeah, it's a complex decision-making environment, and not only that, it's uncertain because it's agriculture. So your climate's, your rainfall's uncertain. How many things don't you have control over? The price of the commodity you're going, the political situation, if they change the export laws or the biosecurity laws, there's so many things that you have no control over. And you're trying to make decisions for your family and the business. So it's complex change, and that's different than simple change.
Yeah.
So you can't use the same tactics. It's can cause a lot of problems. Yeah.
In regen ag, we have a lot of storytelling, and we have a lot of people telling how they've changed. And you've got really people who are very motivational type of people, and then people that are a little bit more reserved. and the story comes out differently. Each time, like someone's like, oh, yeah, this is easy. This is how you do it. You don't have to use that. Forget about that. No more chemicals. And then a reserve person is going, well, that doesn't actually work. In my situation, I cannot operate without that particular tool you're trying to take away from me.
Yeah, so we would talk about context a lot in Regen Ag. You know, context is everything, and you've got to be site and farming system and person specific because it's a complex thing, lots of stuff. And that's an example for you where you can't use a recipe because it's complex change. But the other thing that's sort of highlighted is the fact that if I'm asking Luke to change the way he rides a horse, and I'm over here riding the horse this different way because I've done it for 50 years. So it's easy for me to tell him, oh, you just do this and that, but he's never done it.
Yeah.
So he hasn't been here. He's never got the experience of being here. He's over there. I can tell him about it. He can see me doing it, but he knows to get to where I'm at in terms of riding a horse ability this way, he's got a learning journey to go through that he's got to go through himself.
Yeah. I imagine it's going to be hours in the saddle and making lots of mistakes.
Yeah. Correct.
Getting new muscle memory, getting new...
Yeah. But we don't want it falling off the horse and breaking his leg. He's already had a few injuries when you get to our age. So, but this is it. You've got to match. And so I guess we're talking about types of change. It's a complex change. It has consequences. There's a risk, for everything. There's a risk of losing your friends, your social network. There's lots of risks. So being aware that you're going through change, and most people that are going regen are doing it because they've decided to do it. It hasn't been forced on them. So it's in what we call intentional change. It's not unexpected. Like unexpected change is like when someone dies unexpectedly in the family and you go, wow, now we have to live without that person. You didn't expect it. It wasn't planned. It was a sudden accident or whatever. Whereas this is not unexpected. So if you're deliberately going, yep, we're going to go down this regen world, you're making an intentional change. And as soon as your mind is deliberate on that, now there's models, there's tools in change management, if you like, that will help you go through that. That's, I guess, what today's all about, is talking through this change, because there are kind of frameworks and tips and tools you can have to help you.
Yeah.
Because we often talk about the external stuff like product changing or paddock operations changing or changing your tactics of your cropping, which is all critical. But behind that is this, business challenge that's going on and thinking change that's going on.
Yeah. Yeah, we're going to dive into some models about that thinking change, but let's sit more a bit at in the moment at the social point. So you talked about losing friendships. You might have went to one farmer group and now you're going to a different farmer group and you're hanging out with them more. Like, you miss the people that you weren't hanging out with before, and you might feel a bit rejected because they're not inviting you to things. Like, it's real life stuff.
Yeah, for sure. And I think, like Luke brought it up before, like people, once they get into that community of Regen Ag a bit, they realise that there is networks and peers for. But the reality is that, you've got social connections and family and close ties and kin all over the place, some of whom might be pretty angry that you're leaving their world.
Yeah. Or your dad and mum might not agree with you.
Exactly. That successional thing. So all of that stuff's going on, and you have to deal with. You have to be aware that it's going to happen, and then deal with it, because you're not leaving that network because you don't like those people. You're just leaving that network because your business and personal needs and values are not being met in terms of your farm business. Yeah. So you've got to kind of communicate that a bit, I guess. So, I remember when I did my dairy traineeship, my boss was certified organic dairy, and the plateau we worked on, I don't know, maybe had 40 or 50 dairies, and no one else was organic. So when I went to town to get stuff or whatever, they just thought we were from another planet. Like, they didn't really talk to him in the shop because he was just so weird. He was really the family was pretty socially ostracised, except at church. They'd go to church every Sunday. But apart from that, and one neighbour who was conventional dairy, but it was close neighbours, so he kind of we were people to him. But yeah, it was pretty ostracising. I'll never forget it. It's partly why I kind of took the career path we did. So yeah, so it's important to be aware that there's going to be ramifications. Your bank manager, what the hell are you doing this stuff? So many different aspects. So being aware you're changing and that it's big change and it has risks, you can now start to make a note of, all right, what are the potential flow on? Who do I have to manage in this change? Who do I have to bring along with me? All of that stuff. Yeah.
And I think often in change you do it silently because you're not sure. You're not sure if it's right. You're not sure if it's going to work.
Yeah.
So in that process, you actually feel really isolated because you don't want to align yourself with Regen Ag, but you're not spending time with these conventional people and how they do it. So you're a bit lonely.
Yeah. I think too, with the people going, I'm out here on my own, there are so many people in your area that have got a little plot down the back corner paddock where they're trialling those things anyway. So really, you're not there by yourself. If you just have a little conversation with your neighbour, I'll almost guarantee he goes, oh yeah, I tried a multi-species there a couple of years ago. Yeah. And maybe it didn't work or maybe it did work. So there is people out there that are doing exactly what you want to do.
Yeah.
They're just being silent about it because they don't want to look different. They don't want to look different.
They're not sure that they're there.
And it actually really highlights a key driver that we now know from kind of modern social psychology work is people want to be part of a group.
Yeah.
And that's a key thing for humans is that I'm part of a group, that I'm a welcome member in a group. And if I'm doing something a bit weird down the back, if I don't know that there's a group, that the group will accept that, then I'm just going to keep it on my own. Like the group dynamics is I'll just keep that quiet. But it's interesting because, Luke said before that there's now more and more people in this space that are making changes, that you have that social contagion is the term, but there's a tipping point. It generally thought to be around 20 to 25%. When about 20 to 25% of people think it's normal, then it's safe for you to kind of just throw it out there. So, yeah.
What about, Luke, we were talking earlier about the way that men and women change differently. Do you want to just talk about that a little bit, what you've experienced out there?
Change, lose their hair. And difference.
What drives them with change? What can cause conflict if they're not both wanting to change?
Yeah. So in my experience, when I sit down at the kitchen table, which I try and do with all my customers, is the men want to make their lives simpler and more, and they want to be more cost effective. They want to be, it's more that sort of decision. Whereas the women and the mothers and that, they have that more nurturing thought process, and they want their kids to be safe. They don't want the chemicals around them. They don't want this happening. Like you're out in some of these big cropping farms, and there's a little house here with a yard not much bigger than this room, and they've got tractors spraying around them, and their kids are locked inside. So, and I actually know a few people who are allergic to chemicals, and every time they take a sniff, they have to go to hospital. So that drives their change. But yeah, I find if women want a more health based, and where men are more practical based.
I mean, speaking as a man, you also want to make sure you're putting food on the table, and that's what. That's why that's a priority for their life. And then obviously for the women, it's like, well, I'm bringing these kids into the world and I want them to be happy and healthy. So, I mean, I guess this is the thing about Regen Ag. Can we have both? Can we have a healthy, happy environment and still be profitable and make money? And that's really at the heart of what this change is about a lot of the time.
Yeah, absolutely. Regen farming should be about the happiness of the farmer. The farmers' families and their community.
So regen farming to me is when I very first started, I sat down, I thought, what am I trying to achieve here? And it's regenerate the farming soil, to regenerate the farming family, to regenerate the farming community. That's for me what it is all about.
Yeah. So it's a different perspective than just we've got to make money or we've got to grow as much crops as we can, which supposedly makes you the most money with it's not always as profitable. But yeah, so there's different perspectives coming in. And I guess, if one partner in the family wants change and the other doesn't, then it's an imposed change on that second person. Yeah. And that's what leads to friction, because that second person's arms are going to cross and say, hang on a minute, I don't want this change. whereas someone else does. And, the reality in a human marriage is at a certain point, if both parties aren't getting their needs and wants met, then one leaves or goes somewhere else. That's.
And I've actually seen that happen on several occasions.
Yes.
In that transition to regen ag.
Yeah.
I mean, either female can say, I'm more interested in having a regenerative, low chemical farming system, but Darren's out there doing the hard labour, and it makes it harder on him if he could have done it easier the old way. So that that I can see how the female and the male can actually conflict in that.
Yeah, so this is why it's really important when you're going through all this change process. If you decide you're going to go down the regen ag path as a family business, or any kind of business, is to be aware, okay, we're going through a change process here, and maybe not everyone's going to be on board in terms of committed to the change as much as the key decision maker makers, because at the end of the day, there's usually one or two key decision makers in most family businesses. If not, how do I then manage that? Is the reason that they're really reticent to change because of risk to the business, we will lose the farm, all that kind of stuff? If so, how can we make a change plan that minimises risk so they're a bit happier about at least trying a few things? This is why it's really important to be aware that you're going through a change process. It has stages to it and you can manage it. It's not like we just got to throw myself in here and it's going to be chaotic.
And you can do little changes at a time and then pull up if you get to a point and go, right, we're far enough for now. Another 5 years' time, when we've changed a bit more, we could take that next step.
Yeah.
You don't have to just jump in and do it all straight up.
Yeah, there's different, but the point is be aware of the change process and then have some strategies to that everyone can are comfortable with. So I remember a guy called Ray Platt, who was the Conservation and No-Till Farming Network of New South Wales, which I think is kind of gone now, but it was one of the early no-till networks. He was their kind of field officer that would go around helping farmers convert to no-till in the central western New South Wales. He just loved going out, being with them for 6-8 hours and helping them fix the machinery. But he himself, his father, didn't want to change on this. And it was only when his father ended up having an accident or in a wheelchair that he just came and said, right, now he can't stop me. And then he would make the conversion. I'll never forget him telling me that story. I'm pretty sure I got it right, Ray. But it was like
I'm sure he was kinder than that.
Yeah. But he's pretty because he really wanted. He was passionate. Like he was out under help. Like he was just Mr. No-Till. Like he was amazing. But his old man obviously wasn't. So there's just examples of how to manage change. How can you and so we can do it well if we're aware of the process of change. We can do it better. Yeah.
Well, let's have a look at these processes of change, or their models of change. They are academic models, but we'll try and talk in human language.
Yeah.
The first one is the bridges, change as a transition model, and it's got 3 stages, endings, neutral zone, and the new beginnings.
Yeah, so I kind of like to paraphrase it as you're leaving somewhere, you're going somewhere, you've got a destination, and there's the in-between, which, because you've never been to the destination, you actually don't know how to get there. Like, it's easy if you've been there. Like, I've been to New Zealand for a holiday, so now next time I go, I kind of know where I'm going and how to get there. Whereas if I've never been somewhere, how do I get there? What do I get, a train? Do I get a bus? There's uncertainty. But Bridges was a change theorist. There's lots of different change experts, over the last 50 years. But it's just a really simple model. Like, you're leaving something behind, and, that's something that can be sad because, you've been successful or you've got friends in that world that hopefully you still keep, but you are leaving something behind, and you've got to acknowledge that. Like some people, when you lose a loved one, there's grieving, and part of that is you've lost that loss. You've got to acknowledge it. So being aware of what you're leaving behind and not throwing out the baby with the bathwater, being aware of that leaving is important, and then trying to work out where you're headed, because it's easy to talk about the bad stuff and the problems. That's human nature, to always talk about that. But why am I doing this? I'm doing this because I want to have a holiday 2 weeks a year. I don't want to be not having a holiday. So I'm doing this so knowing where you're headed, even if it's not specific. I don't actually know exactly what tractor I'll be using but having that destination, trying to keep that in your mind. Yeah.
Yeah. I think that in between bit's probably the toughest.
Well, that's the neutral zone. Next.
Yeah, he calls it the neutral zone, but it's the transition zone, and the transition's all about learning.
So we've jumped in the car from where we're leaving, and in our neutral zone, I suppose we've got the podcast on to learn about how to get to our destination.
But you can listen all you like, but unless you do, and you learn by doing, it's farming, isn't it? But it's how we minimise the risk during that. Yeah. So we could even call this neutral zone or transition. We could call it the learning phase. Yeah. Not that you're not always learning, but if you're making a big change from an old way of farming to a new one, a complex change, there's a lot of learning you're going to get.
And it's the quiet stage as well, because you're quietly learning to make sure you want to learn that.
So I'll go back to a horse analogy. A very good horseman. He teaches horses in different stages. So you've got your concept stage, so where you first when you're first starting to work out what you actually want to do, and then you have like your learning stage. So you've got the concept, then you go to learning, then you go into a stage of consolidation. And then after that consolidation, it actually just becomes part of your...
You got mastery of it.
Yeah, it just becomes part of you and you just do.
Yeah.
So you don't think about it.
Yeah, that's right. And so you've gone through a learning process. We have a similar model in Soil and Food with change, with learning and stuff. But you get to the point where you can make decisions in a different way, confidently. And so the Bridges model is good because it's like, okay, I've got to remember I'm leaving this, so I've got to manage that leaving. I've got to always never forget where I'm trying to head to, even if it's not fully clear yet because I haven't been there. But I kind of know what I don't want, but I'm not sure exactly how it'll be. But I've got to constantly give myself positive motivation. And then there's this learning. Well, the first part of that is, what do I need to learn? Like, okay, Luke's come to visit me, or I've heard this thing from David Hardwick at the workshop. What's a biostimulant? And he was using this word, or what's some of the K&F jargon? What the hell is an IMO? Like, that opens a whole new world. So you got to learn the basics, and then you got to learn how I might use that. And then I've actually got to use it and practice using it in my agronomy for a couple of years in different situations before I'm actually confident that I can use it as part of my program and it's going to give me a result. So there's a whole learning process, which brings this key concept that change is actually a learning process for humans anyway. Yeah.
And then there's that whole remembering to do it all the time. So it's the psychological repatterning. So you might think, oh, I've got to go out and spray those weeds. And then you go, oh, hang on, if I'm going to be regenerative, is there another way I can do that before I spray?
Yeah.
And because you've got this natural instinct of how to do something first.
So you've got to rewire your perspective. Yeah. So, and that's the thing, the change starts with not necessarily values as we talked about, but perspective and how you see your business system or how you see your plants and soils interacting. So unless you go through that change, you'll always use tactics from your old way of thinking.
Yeah.
So it is big change or second order change is the jargon that this other model uses. Complex big change affects you at a deep level. How you see things, how you actually, what are some of your goals? It's not just about money, it's also about health for the family or nutrition. Like it changes it at a deep level. That's what we call big second order change is the jargon, but it's basically you're changing at a deep level.
You're basically changing your identity.
Yeah, well, you're still a farmer.
Or is that too harsh?
You're still a farmer.
You still got your identity.
Yeah. I mean, I remember talking to some of the sugarcane farmers that are regen farmers because they started to talk about all their cover crops and alternative cash crops because a lot of cane farmers never really grew too many other crops, if any. And then when they started to talk like that, I said, oh, you guys aren't cane farmers anymore, you're just farmers. And they got a bit upset with me because their identity was on the cane farmer, but all of a sudden they're talking about all these other crops they're growing. Well, you're more than that. Whereas if you talk to a wheat cropper on the Riverina, they don't just call themselves a wheat farmer, I'm a cropper. Yeah. I'll grow a range of different things. So those cane guys kind of mentally went through this transition to actually I'm a farmer. I do grow cane, but I grow all these other crops too. That was a big mental jump for them. Because their identity was on the cane farmer and in their community, the mill's the biggest thing in town. And so, but that was their part of their change. Yeah.
Yeah, I think the identity thing is a big thing. Like people lose their identity when they change.
Especially big change.
Yeah.
Well, you ask someone what they do, and that's part of your identity when you meet them.
Yeah.
And now, how do you answer that?
Yeah.
It's different.
Yeah, that's right. And I do a bit of work in the mental health field with a few different things, and identity comes up all the time. Yeah, I was going to.
And purpose.
Yeah, identity, purpose, all those sorts of things. So when you take someone's identity from them, they don't know who they are anymore.
Yeah.
So,
and that's part of leaving. Like if I start going regen and my normal community network is not, then I'm actually stepping out of my identity. So that's having a network around you that you can be part of. Yeah. Keep an identity.
Yeah. And that's part of the change that you have to manage.
Yeah. Yeah.
How you're being in the world and how you define yourself as being in the world, how you add value to the world.
Yeah.
So we've left somewhere. We've lost some friends, potentially.
Trying to see some glass half full. Just this is the thing. When people don't manage change, you get lots of unintended negatives.
Yeah.
It doesn't need to be that way. That's my whole reason for being passionate about change.
Understanding it.
Because if you are aware of it and understand all these things we're chatting about, which most people are if they stop and think about it, then you don't have to lose your friends. They might think you're weird. It doesn't mean...
Have that honest conversation with you. So this is actually what I'm doing. Don't stay silent and don't stop.
And don't get frustrated when they don't think that you're doing a good thing, they don't get annoyed because they don't want to come along for the ride.
And don't try and tell them that they should as well.
Yeah. And if they see you're doing something and you're happy and get some wins, and they might be open to having a chat to you. But if you're not doing anything illegal, then who am I to say, you can farm? Like if you want to farm this way or that way, as long as you're not doing something illegal, it's all good.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So then we move on to new beginnings. So I've been a bit of a negative Nancy at the start with endings. We've had this lonely neutral stage where we're not really sure, we're learning. Well,
I guess most of the tactics around change that you need to put in place is to deal with that. I'm going to call it the learning zone, the learn transition stage. And that's, we'll get to towards the end of the podcast, like what are some things you can do practically to help you or your family in the farm business transition, because the transitions phase is the uncertain phase. You've never done multi-species cropping this way, or you've never used biologicals in your program. It's all new. So you're going to have to take risks and control and do learnings. So we can talk about how you minimize that risk and maximize the learning for yourself in your context. But it's always really important to remember where you're headed, which is not just where you were. Like, you don't want to be where you were. I know that's important, but it's like, well, how do we want to see things in the future? Yeah.
And that's like, we've got new beginnings. So you've got endings, neutral, new beginnings. And that's where, Luke, you talked about where it's exciting. And did you talk about that, or was that earlier? You were saying how exciting it is to learn new things. You get more energized because you can see these things that you can actually do without having to control it. If you just provide the environment, these plants do amazing things.
And if you start to get some successes, then that reinforces it for you. Yeah. I'll give you an example of a different way of being. There's a dairy farmer I did some work with for a few years, and they rang me after a few years after they lowered their nitrogen and changed their grazing, basically. A few years later, he rang me about 3 weeks before Christmas. It was early December. I remember where I was in Wodonga, and he said, Dave, we just had a bit of a chat. He said, Dave, this will be the first Christmas lunch where I'm sitting down with the family and I won't be thinking about how I'm going to pay the fertilizer bill in January. And I just stopped, he stopped, and it was just a really light bulb moment for both of us in that way. But it was just really powerful because his business model, his profit, his cash flow, everything had changed. And now when he sat down for Christmas, he didn't have cash flow stress in January. And that was an outcome. And he's a very strong on his numbers. Like, he's one of those farmers that really keeps the profit, tracks it every month. That's why he started to change, because he wasn't making money as a conventional dairy. But he's now in a new place, and it's like those things that start to add up for you. Okay, this is what I was heading towards, a better about the situation for the family, for the business. But sometimes it's hard to get to be clear what that is because you've never been there. Like, I know if I go to New Zealand, I can know where I'd like to go because I've been to some of those places. But if it's all new, then it can be a bit hard to set your goals. But you know what you don't want, but now it's good to also think what you do want.
Thanks for joining us for part 1 of our Managing Regenerative Transition episode. We have now set the scene for the motivations and challenges in managing transition. Please join us next month for part 2 of this series, where we'll take a deep dive into the different models of transition, and David and Luke will give me their top tips for successfully navigating change. Please follow the Biological Farming Roundtable podcast. Share it with your friends and networks. I'm Nakala Maddock and I work at Nutrisoil, a liquid biological fertiliser made from a big worm farm whose purpose is to empower farmers to produce life-enriching food.